order with this stuff. Here's Neville Shute on the beach. This is a, well, when we were talking about after the bomb stories, there were two kinds. There were kinds that were written in the genre by writers like, Lee Brackett, and I mean pretty much every science fiction writer wrote after the bomb stories. Heinlein did it with I think it's Farnham's Freehold, and Ray did it, and Ted did it with Ted Sturgeon did it with, I think, Thunder and Roses and so forth. But there were also mainstream writers writing after the bomb stories, and this is probably the most famous one, On the Beach by Neville Shute, who was a very popular Australian writer, and it came out in the 50s, and 1958. This is the first edition, and it was made into a movie with Gregory Peck and Fred Astaire and Ava Gardner, and it's a very good film and a very good novel, but extremely depressing. But and then let's see what else I found. This is a really cool thing. Sometimes I like to collect the same editions, variant editions of the same book. And so this is the current, if you went into England and bought the current paperback of The Forever War by my teacher, Joe Haldeman, who I've named a general after in Space Command, it looks like this. Sort of cyberpunk and green and kind of, hip and edgy. But I also found this earlier edition, which is the same cover with a more normal landscape, which I actually prefer this version to this. But you can see that it's the same illustration, but with a very different palette. Isn't that interesting? So I'm going to have Joe sign these, and really cool. He's a great guy. If you haven't met him, definitely look him up when he's at a convention. And but then I found this, Christopher Priest, The Space Machine, which is a sequel to The Time Machine, which is very, very fun. Christopher Priest also did a book series that was made into a TV series in England called Tripods, that was pretty much about Martian walking machines and an alien invasion, and kids who fight back. But this is very, very fun. And we'll talk soon about sequels to books by other writers, and that's another subject we'll get into in a Mr. Sci-Fi soon. But then we get to the collection of this guy who had these amazing books. So, for instance, here's the British paperback edition of Starship Troopers. I've never seen this book before. Look at how fun that is. Very cool. And then let's see what else we have in here. There's a lot of books. I bought a lot of books. So then here we have, this is the British edition of The Puppet Masters. Again, first British paperback edition. Never seen that cover. Really cool cover. Very much like Richard Powers. May even be by Richard Powers, for all I know. And I can research that. And then let's see what else we have here in the grab bag. Amazing stuff. Okay, Green Hills of Earth by Heinlein. Another very, very cool cover. And again, this is the British edition. Very fun. Never saw that before. Most of these I never saw before. This is Escape to Venus by S. Makepeace Lot. And it's got a great, great female spacesuit. And we're going to be having the spacesuit contest soon. And that one certainly would qualify as remarkable. And, again, you can see how cool that is. And then here's a great edition of Childhood's End. This is the first British edition. And it's just a very evocative cover, which I really love. And then this is The Door into Summer, an edition of Robert Heinlein's book. And again, this is the British edition. I've never seen this cover, and it's very fun and again very different for a science fiction book to have this kind of sexy cheesecake kind of cover. And then here's another great cover, the British edition of The Currents of Space. These are all 1950s paperbacks, and you can see the idea was, hardcovers tended to have more refined covers, and those were more respectable. They got the reviews, whereas the paperbacks, because they were smaller and you'd see them on a news rack and they were competing for your eyeballs, generally they'd have more lurid covers. Victim of a psychic probe, it says on the back, and oddly enough, that's got a photograph. So who knows what that thing is? But it's like, oh my gosh, victim of a psychic probe. Okay, terrific. And then we get to E Pluribus Unicorn by Theodore Sturgeon, my old teacher and mentor and friend. And you can see it's a strange and moody cover. He's much more of a psychological kind of science fiction writer. And this is, sometimes they would have books almost be, look like mainstream books. This is Nerves by Lester Del Rey. It's about an accident in a nuclear power plant decades before 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl. And it's a cover by Richard Powers, even though so this is actually an American edition, Ballantine Books. And it's interesting because Richard Powers primarily does kind of abstracts, because he did a very realistic doctor in the foreground. So that's really a fun book. And then we have Pilgrimage by Zena Henderson. Now, Zena Henderson was one of the few female writers of science fiction of that era who used her name. her real name. And this is I recommend these. These are books of a group called the People, and they sort of live almost like Amish people, but they have psychic powers, and they're fun. They're really good stories and interconnected stories about those people. Then there's this wonderful book of All Possible Worlds by William Tenn, and that's much more a typical kind of Richard Powers cover, which you can see sort of semi abstract, where there's a spaceship and a spaceman, but also these weird shapes. And then we have Destination Universe by A.E. Van Vogt. And again, these are cool. And again, these writers, I mean, the writers were very much of the community of the artists and the editors and the publishers. They all knew each other. They'd all go to conventions, and even the British contingent, read and knew the American contingent. This is the British paperback first edition of Sirens of Titan by Vonnegut. Again, I've never seen this book. It's really cool, and that's of course when Vonnegut was being packaged. He started to be packaged as sort of a science fiction, but also a mainstream writer. Kind of, this is a transitional thing where it says this wild and cruelly satiric fantasy about mankind in the nightmare age can only be described as electrifying, a science fiction novel of staggering originality and fabulous imagination. So, and it's corgi science fiction. So it's being packaged as science fiction, and they're describing it not on the back cover. They describe it on the back cover as well, but here on the front cover, on the idea that maybe people who had never heard of Vonnegut might be drawn in by the description as well as by the illustration. And then this is a book by Frederick Pohl and Jack Williamson, who also wrote on their own and also collaborated with other writers. And this is Star Child. And it's kind of sexy and interesting. And there was another cover similar to a novel by John Wyndham called Chalky, and I think it's the same artist. And this is, again, a Ballantine book, so it's the American edition. Sometimes the American editions would just be repriced and sold in England. And then this is Nonstop by Brian Aldiss, which is a great cover of a guy sort of flying on an out-of-control flying saucer. I believe this is an Ed Emshwiller cover, and it's just, swell in every way, and just so. And let's see what else we have in here. Okay, so here's The War Against the Roll by A.E. Van Vogt. So really fun with a guy in space and a spacesuit, and and again, never saw this edition before. This is the Silver Locust. This is the first paperback edition of the Martian Chronicles in England. And it has a story that wasn't in the American edition, that was censored in the American edition, called The Fire Balloons, which is about a priest who tries to find a way of preaching the gospel to these alien creatures that look like balloons, and to find something that will convey Jesus that isn't a representation of him as a human. And it's a really good story, and it was years later that story was included in the American editions of the Martian Chronicles, and it was called The Silver Locust rather than the Martian Chronicles. And the Silver Locust basically refers to, the fleet of spaceships of the colonists who come to Mars and colonize it, that it's like locusts. And so then this is A.E. Van Vogt, The Voyage of the Space Beagle. And this is a book that when Aliens came out, they sued. A.E. Van Vogt sued, claiming that some of the ideas had come from this book, and he won, and he was given or whether he sued or threatened to sue, he was given a payment, paid off. And but this is about, a monster that gets loose on a spaceship. And haven't read this one yet, but I've heard it's really, really good. And let's see what else we have in here. Ooh, this is this is, of course, like, the end of the world stories, which are wonderful, wonderful. And this is called the Cataclysm. And you can see that London is being washed away by water, and there's a bus, a double-decker bus being washed away. And, again, the cover art, who knows if the book is good, but the cover art is certainly great. And let's see what else we have in here. Okay, this is No Man Friday, which is Last Man on Mars, a man marooned on Mars. And it's sort of like Robinson Crusoe on Mars, which was, again, there was a movie of that name not derived from this book, but then also The Martian has the same notion. And so it's fun to see, and you can see it's a very interesting spacesuit here. And again, we'll be having our spacesuit contest soon. I'll be announcing that. And then, of course, here's Foundation by Isaac Asimov. That is a Richard Powers cover, and this is the British edition, and it's really cool looking. And that's a great one of the famous trilogies that Asimov wrote. That's gone down as one of the great works of science fiction. Then here's another Asimov book, Earth is Room Enough, a collection of short stories all set on Earth. And you can see there's a spaceship and Earth and the moon. And again, this is the British edition. And it's lovely when you're a collector and you find things you've never seen before that you didn't know existed, and that's the great love. And you can see they're all in plastic. They're all from this one guy's collection, and and that's not all of them. There, we'll get to the last few when we're getting down to the bottom. This is The World in Peril by Charles Chilton. This was the third series in Journey into Space, which is one of my favorite things in the world. It was Journey into Space was a British radio show written and produced by Charles Chilton. And it's the first one is a journey to the moon, the second one is a journey to Mars, and then the third one is going back to Earth from Mars to warn that there's an invasion coming. And these are the novelizations, and they're just wonderful. He's a wonderful writer. I highly recommend the radio shows. You can find them online, and they were a huge inspiration to many astronomers, many scientists, particularly in England. And so here's The Tide Went Out by Charles Eric Maine, and again, this is another end of the world story, again with very evocative, a novel for adult minds only. Look at that. Well, then I probably shouldn't read it, but but it's cool, really cool. So we're getting to the bottom of the bag now, getting toward the bottom. Let's see what else we have here that's incredibly wonderful and cool. So what's next? It's like Christmas Day for me. Okay, so this is Address Centauri by F.L. Wallace. And this is a Galaxy science fiction novel. So this is a British, this was sold in Britain, but it's an American book. And the cover, some of you may recognize, is by Wally Wood. Now, he wasn't a well-known cover artist in books, but he was a great artist in EC Comics and Weird Science, which we talked about a little bit before. And so it's really fun to see him as a cover artist doing something different. And he's credited as Wallace Wood, not Wally Wood on the book. So. And then this is a great cover. This is This Fortress World by James E. Gunn. And this is an ace double. So there's The 13th Immortal by Robert Silverberg, who we talked about a little bit before. He was a pal of Harlan Ellison's, and I just saw him at the Worldcon and got a book autographed by him. I should get this one autographed by him. But you can see it's a great robot and carrying an unconscious guy. Usually it would be an unconscious girl, which would have been a better idea probably. And it says Fugitive from Utopia. Now, one problem with these books, of course, is that they're so fragile that reading them essentially destroys them when they're this old. And so usually what you do is you either get a copy that you can read, that you don't mind if you destroy it, or there's a later edition you can buy, or a hardcover. The hardcovers are far more durable. And sometimes you can read a book and you won't destroy it. It just depends on the condition it's in. So then here's a collection by Donald Walheim, and he later had his own publishing company called DAW Books, D-A-W Books, which were his initials. But he was also a science fiction book editor, and this is End of the World, and you can see the Earth is blowing up. And this is another great Ed M. Schwiller cover, and he was very prolific. And then this is yet another great Ed M. Schwiller cover. This is Recruit for Andromeda by Milton Lesser. And this is not a well-known science fiction name in books, but when we get to X-1 and Dimension X, there were a couple of guys who adapted those stories wonderfully to radio, and Milton Lesser was one of those guys. And again, this is a wonderful cover, and it's an ace double, so we have this cover on the flip side. So now we get to the last one that I bought. I think that's it. Yep. And this is Starways, and that's by Poul Anderson, another classic and very famous science fiction writer. It's another cover by Ed M. Schwiller. And many of these covers, by the way, are not signed and they are not credited, usually on the inside of the book, but you can recognize certain telltale artist tricks or styles, and you can start to recognize who's doing what. Ed M. Schwiller was extremely prolific, and then he became a filmmaker and had a second career in which he was extremely notable. So that's it. Those are the ones that I bought, and as I mentioned, I stayed at the Future Inn, so you can see the Future Inn. I was staying in the future, yay, and perfect for me, of course. So that's it. And so in the next Mr. Sci-Fi, we'll be talking about sequels written by other writers to famous books. We'll get into that, and we'll be announcing the details of the spacesuit contest. And it's going to be lots of cool stuff ahead. We're going to be doing more with Space Command, lots to tell you about, lots of fun, and many adventures to come. So thanks very much, and we'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Bye-bye, guys.